I want to make money betting on the NFL in 2020. But can anyone catch the Packers? How do I make money betting on the Bears, Lions, Vikings, and Packers games? I need information I can use from week 1 through the playoffs. Welcome back to aosportspicks TV. I'm Alpha Omega. Now that we have a few weeks of the 2020 NFL season in the books, there is enough statistical data from 2020 for me to put out videos giving you fairly accurate predictions for each team throughout the rest of the season, as well as the playoffs. This video covers every team in the NFC North. And for the newbies out there, that means the Chicago Bears, the Detroit Lions, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Green Bay Packers. This video is one part of a playlist providing season updates on every team in the NFL. I designed the entire playlist to be useful from now through the end of the season. So it doesn't matter when you find these videos, you can still use them to make money. Once you finish this video, you can find the playlist by clicking the link in the pinned comment or in the description. I also recommend you watch the whole playlist more than once because I'm putting a lot of information into each one of these videos. I also have timestamps in the progress bar and in the description so you can easily choose what you want to watch next. After watching, you'll have more knowledge than your friends, you'll be able to create smarter DFS lineups, and most importantly to me, you can start making winning sports bets from now all the way through the championship. And for those of you wondering if sports betting is still a thing, given the current situation in our country, according to Yahoo Finance, the biggest storyline of the 2020 NFL season isn't the situation, it's gambling. In the 2 years since the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the federal ban on sports betting, allowing individual states to legalize sports betting, 16 states have done so, joining Nevada in allowing some form of legal sports betting. According to the American Gaming Association, revenue from legal sports betting is up 19% in 2020 through July, compared to the first 7 months of last year, and the total amount wagered is up 3.2%. All of this despite the situation shutting down live sports for 4 months. Basically, sports betting is going mainstream. Anyway, back to the NFC North. Let me explain how I bet on the NFL. Firstly, the NFL is an incredibly tough market that is notoriously difficult to succeed in year over year. This is how I've managed to win over the last few years. What I do is I take all of the information gathered from before the season started, meaning all the trades, the injuries, free agency, the draft, coaching changes, roster construction, all of the statistical data from 2019, and a hell of a lot more to start making 2020 week-by-week predictions. Then I take the 2020 play-by-play statistical data from the weeks that have already been played to help determine where my projections are correct and where my projections are wrong for the upcoming week. Then I look for the best number from a list of every major sports book on whichever games I feel give me the best opportunity to make money. Finally, I do my best to get as much money down on those games as possible. Remember, when searching for the best sportsbook for you, make sure you only sign up with sportsbooks that give you the best chance to win. It's not show friends, it's show business, and every sportsbook wants you as their customer. And with the increase in popularity we just talked about, they want you pretty bad. Check this out. From Digiday. Over the past 12 months, several large sports media brands, including NBC Sports, CBS Sports, ESPN, and Bleacher Report have signed partnership deals with sportsbooks. While not every deal is structured the same, the largest arrangements are potentially worth hundreds of millions of dollars. One sportsbook is committed to spending almost $400 million with NBC Sports over the next 5 years, plus commissions for driving customers. NBC Sports also gets a 5% stake in PointsBet, whose shares mature in 5 years. So for all you non-Packer fans out there, I have some bad news for you. The Packers have pretty much already secured the NFC North. Barring either an injury to Aaron Rodgers or the biggest meltdown we've ever seen, the Packers will win the division. That's not to say that Green Bay going full Adam Gase is impossible, but I wouldn't make a bet on it. As far as the favorite to win the division, while the Packers are obviously in charge, in recent years it's been a toss-up. The Packers won the division last year, even though they weren't the favorites. And the Bears won the division the year before that, and Chicago wasn't the favorite then either. That trend seems to be continuing this year. According to Sports Betting Dimes, with the Minnesota Vikings offense looking inconsistent in a Week 1 loss to Green Bay, and worse in their 28-11 loss to Indianapolis in Week 2, their odds to win the NFC North have slipped to plus 500. This is the same Vikings team that was favored to win the NFC entering Week 1. Other than the Packers' success, the Bears' success so far this year has been somewhat surprising. But Chicago's still a pretender waiting to be exposed. The current thought has the Packers and Bears being the much better teams. But in my opinion, all four teams are much closer. Kind of like the AFC South of the NFC. Let's start with the Bears. The Chicago Bears under coach Matt Nagy are off to kind of a hot start, with wins over the Detroit Lions, a division rival, a victory over one of the worst teams in football in the New York Football Giants, and an impressive on-the-surface win against Tom Brady and the very injured Buccaneers. There's a lot of hype building around the Bears, which really speaks to why you should never buy into the hype. The lack of ability in the Bears quarterback room may be low-hanging fruit, but that's where we're going to begin. From John Greenberg at The Athletic, Nick Foles showed the football world that yes, he's better than Mitch Trubisky. Not a lot better, to be sure. Foles had some awful misses in the first half, missing short and long by head-scratching distances. Speaking of quarterbacks, $24.8 million for Mitchell Trubisky. This guy is sitting on the bench making that kind of money. A contract like that speaks to poor roster construction and an unwillingness to admit that Trubisky was a mistake. Let's talk about this past offseason. Why did they trade for Nick Foles? There was Cam Newton, Andy Dalton, Jameis Winston, and you chose Nick Foles? Now, this isn't taking anything away from the fact that Foles had an amazing playoff run a few years ago. Big Nick strapped on his you-know-whats, and he won the championship. But outside of that playoff run, Foles has been bad. Don't be fooled by squeaking out a win against Tampa Bay. Foles has been on like 6 teams for a reason, and it's not because he's amazing. Big Nick is going to use that playoff run as a calling card for the rest of his career. And who can blame him? He'll probably get a couple more contracts, especially if he continues winning with the Bears. But I mean, really, what a bad decision by Bears management. Look at what Cam signed for, what Jameis signed for, and then look at what they paid for Foles. It typifies the stupidity of the Bears and the huge egos in that front office. I mean, presumably the goal was to bring someone in to challenge Trubisky and give Mitch some competition during the offseason and training camp. But as the Chicago Sun-Times states, Coach Nagy, who always has been a tremendous ally during Trubisky's struggles, defended him. There's been a lot of growth with him in his decision-making. We talked last year. Let's not make a bad play worse. And if something bad happens on one play, let's make a good play the next. He's been doing that. We haven't had that domino effect. That, to me, is another sign of growth. Nagy's trying to save his job, so he benches Mitch and puts in Foles. But in the end, Nagy screwed up not bringing in Cam or Jameis when he had the chance. Think about this. At the time, bringing someone in like Jameis or especially Cam Newton would have been a direct move against Trubisky. And the fact that a move like that would signal that the Bears were moving on from Mitch and were moving on to another quarterback who could potentially be a franchise guy. But that's not what the Bears did. I don't think anyone in the universe of NFL talent evaluation or roster construction looks at Nick Foles and says, this is a future franchise quarterback who can lead my team for 5+ years. That was never the goal. The goal was to get someone in there to push Trubisky, which shows an unwillingness on the part of Nagy and Bears management to just admit they made a mistake with Trubisky. And whether it's from a job preservation standpoint or an ego-related thing, it's just plain stupid. A piece from NBC Sports Chicago illustrates my point. There have been some good quarters and some bad quarters, but the Bears have liked what they've seen from Foles. Yeah, I would say that right now we definitely see enough improvement, Matt Nagy told reporters. There's a couple reads that he had in that game that he didn't get to. He knows that. Nagy went on to say that despite a few missed reads, the team's actually been pleased with the decision-making that Foles has displayed so far. Setting the quarterback situation aside, during the offseason, the Bears have flown under the radar because of how badly former Texans coach Bill O'Brien handled the offseason, which incidentally is why O'Brien's now out of a job. Bill O'Brien's stupidity and his ego drove the bus right off a cliff, and the Hopkins trade became the biggest news of the whole offseason, which overshadowed and kind of hid some of the other teams that also made bad decisions in the offseason. And the Bears are at the top of that list. They gave Robert Quinn a lot of money. According to SpotTrack, Robert Quinn signed a 5-year, $70 million contract with the Chicago Bears, including a $3 million signing bonus, $30 million guaranteed, and an average annual salary of $14 million. Quinn is already 30 years old, and that's way too much money for just a slightly above average defensive lineman. But Quinn's contract, while not smart, really isn't that bad. The Jimmy Graham deal was the dumbest contract signed by any NFL team this year. According to SpotTrack, Jimmy Graham signed a 2-year, $16 million contract with the Chicago Bears, including a $6 million signing bonus, $9 million guaranteed, and an average annual salary of $8 million. No other team was giving Graham anywhere close to that kind of money, and the Bears gave it to him for multiple years. Graham was a cast-off from the Packers, the Bears' division rival. Jimmy hasn't found a place to make it work since the Saints, and it makes no sense why Chicago signed him. Listen to what the Packers have to say. According to Cheesehead TV, a dynamic tight end is an offensive equalizer, and Graham has been known as just that. The problem, of course, is that Graham hasn't been dynamic since 2016. Graham was supposed to be another receiver and cause major headaches for opposing defenses. Graham just turned 32 in November, and one would have thought he could have easily played until 33 or 34. But this doesn't have anything to do with age, but it has everything to do with effort. Now, it's hard for the Packers to put him on the field. His routes are careless. He has the 4th lowest reception percentage of his career and has the worst PFF offensive grade of his career. This may sound like hyperbole, but Graham was a bust. The Bears are going to be paying over $10 million to tight ends this year, and Jimmy Graham isn't even the best tight end on the team. The best tight end is first-round rookie Cole Kmet. Speaking of Kmet and the Bears draft, the Bears had poor quantity and quality of draft picks because they traded all their picks to the Raiders for Khalil Mack. And in one of the most spectacular draft classes seen in the last decade, who did the Bears use their first-round pick on? A tight end. The same position that Chicago just gave a washed-up Jimmy Graham $16 million for 2 years for. Absolutely stupid decision-making. It's so bad, we don't even have to see how this plays out to know that it's bad. According to the Bleacher Report, we gave the Chicago Bears a grade of D on their offseason heading into the 2020 season. It's hard to find the positive. Even their best signing, Robert Quinn, is questionable. The question is, can a difference maker like Khalil Mack make up for all that? No, he can't. Khalil Mack is a superstar, no question. And if people want to point out Mack's decrease in production in 2019 as a sign of Mack falling off, that was directly correlated with the fact that Akeem Hicks missed a lot of time. After Hicks went out of the lineup, it became apparent that without Hicks, Mack was getting double-teamed on almost every play. Nagy himself was quoted when speaking about Khalil Mack. He may even be more dominant for that fact of the amount of attention that he's getting. Best case scenario is the Bears have absolute stud linebackers and a solid defensive line. But in order to succeed, there needs to be a surprise from the secondary. If the Bears' secondary really exceeds expectations, the defense as a whole could be above average. And by above average, I mean between 11th and 15th overall, but not in the top 10. Moving back to the offensive side of the ball, the Bears' offensive line ranks well below average, landing at 22nd in PFF's annual O-line rankings. The Bears regressed from a fringe top 10 offensive line in 2018 to the 25th ranked unit last season, despite most of the group remaining intact. The Bears have the pieces to rank among the top 10 to 15 offensive lines in the league, but they need the tackles to get back to their 2018 form to go with progression from at least 2 players on the interior. The wide receiving core for the Bears is also full of question marks. Allen Robinson is asking for a contract on par with other number 1 wide receivers, and he might deserve it. Robinson has always had poor quarterback play, so it's difficult to tell how good he really is because he's had Blake Bortles and MVP Mitch throwing to him his whole career. Regardless, I haven't seen enough to show that he's worth a number 1 receiver contract. According to ESPN, Robinson's preference, by all accounts, is to do an extension with the Bears and stay in Chicago. But if they don't want to pay him what he believes he's worth, he has raised the idea of the Bears trading him to another team that will, or at least one where he might be able to put up more impressive numbers in advance of free agency. The negotiations have reached the point in which Robinson is frustrated and wondering if that might be the best option. The Bears' current number 2 wideout is rookie Darnell Mooney. Mooney actually outplayed veteran Anthony Miller for the number 2 role, which could be good or could be bad. Then Chicago has Jimmy Graham, who I already mentioned will get benched at some point in favor of Cole Kmet. And the running back position is a mess. Starting running back David Montgomery is not very good, in my opinion. I don't think he has any dynamic ability to hit holes and create space for himself, and he doesn't have enough speed to make up for any of his shortcomings. The Bears are using Montgomery as their starting back, but then sign another stupid contract with Tariq Cohen, who sadly is now out for the year with a torn ACL. According to USA Today, the Bears and running back Tariq Cohen agreed to a 3-year, $17.3 million contract extension. Montgomery is in the second year of his 4-year rookie contract that's set to expire in 2022. If Montgomery becomes the feature back the Bears believe he can be, they'll be forced to pay him consistent with the top running back contracts in the NFL. Overall, this offense will be playing catch-up in a lot of games. Chicago also has a new offensive coordinator in Bill Lazor. But what exactly is his role? Nagy seems to be a guy who has understanding and vision for what he wants offensively. So I'm not sure what aspects of the offense Nagy releases to Lazor. Quoting the Chicago Sun-Times, Bill Lazor is the third coordinator tasked with coaxing consistency out of Trubisky. Lazor ran offenses in Cincinnati and Miami. Lazor has his quarterbacks make a list of everything they need to study about a defense: first, second, and third down tendencies, and preferences in short yardage, long yardage, the red zone, and more, and tackle them on the same days each week. 2 years ago, when the Bears won 12 games, a lot of the success was based on Nagy's first 15 scripted plays. Some final thoughts on the Bears? If Chicago can get a touchdown or 2 on the board, it changes the whole complexion of how to defend the lead and play the game, rather than playing catch-up. The first quarter will generally be the difference because this team has very little ability to come back from deficits, regardless of what we've seen from Nick Foles so far. The absolute ceiling of this team is 9-7, and the most likely outcome at this point is 8-8. The Bears sit at 4-1, so Chicago is still very much alive to reach their win ceiling of 9. The Bears' schedule starts getting tough in Week 7 against the Rams, and considering that the Panthers have been far more competitive than was anticipated prior to the season, the Panthers will be tough also. My betting recommendations for the Bears: don't be fooled by the 4-1 record. The marketplace is starting to overvalue Chicago, and the win against the Bucs sets up perfect to make money fading the Bears moving forward. Look for short dog numbers or any spot where the Bears are favored and fade them. Let's move to the next team in the NFC North, the Detroit Lions. If you're a Lions fan, you know that in 2019, prior to injury, quarterback Matthew Stafford was low-key playing the best football of his entire career. He did play against some easy pass defenses, but at the same time, he still has to make those throws, and he was making all of them. Stafford was clearly performing at a top 10 level before he got hurt, but after Stafford went down, the Lions lost their next 8 games. Quoting SB Nation Detroit, last year, Matthew Stafford was slinging it. On pace for nearly 5,000 yards, Stafford had been reborn under new offensive coordinator Darrell Bevell. Specifically, the long ball was back, as Stafford set a career high with 8.6 yards per attempt. He was right in the thick of MVP conversations and had the Lions going toe-to-toe with the top NFL teams. Then he was diagnosed with a back injury, and it was all over. Here's the million-dollar question when deciding how to bet on the Detroit Lions this season. Was Stafford's excellent play last year before injury a product of new offensive coordinator Darrell Bevell and what he was doing with the offense? Was it Stafford who was taking the next step in his career, or was it all just luck? Like I said, Detroit did play some soft pass defenses before Stafford went down. The whole handicap for the Lions revolves around what we expect from Matthew Stafford moving forward in 2020. Going back to SB Nation Detroit, will the Lions franchise quarterback come out firing again? Will his growth under Bevell only continue to get better? Or is there a chance for some serious regression? Is it possible 2019 was the outlier and we'll see a more above-average Stafford compared to 2019's elite Stafford? Before we get there, let's make it clear. I don't like Matt Patricia as the head coach, and I don't like defensive coordinator Corey Unlin. But Darrell Bevell breathed fresh life into this offense, and it showed up when Stafford was on the field. Detroit was throwing deeper, and Stafford was really slinging the ball nicely. You can play bad defenses, but you still have to execute the plays. Stafford was throwing deeper on average, but more importantly, old Pad Stafford was throwing beyond the sticks on third down, something he has struggled with his entire career. So far in 2020, efficiency is down in Stafford's play. In the NFL's next-gen completion percentage over expectation, Stafford clocks in at minus 6.32, ahead of only Dwayne Haskins and Carson Wentz. When you're being talked about in the same breath as Carson Wentz in 2020, that's not a good thing. I'll put a link at the top of the screen where I talk about my full thoughts on Carson Wentz and the Eagles. Even with the lack of success so far in 2020, the Lions are not a terrible team. Again, in 2019, Stafford got hurt. And then once the Lions got into the back end of their season, when the strength of their schedule would ease up, they didn't have their starting QB. Detroit also had issues at running back, and they have very good receivers that you didn't hear a ton about in 2019 because David Blau and Jeff Driscoll were throwing them the ball. And because of all that, the season was a disaster. When discussing the 2019 Lions season, Fansided.com correctly stated, "Believing that the Lions are going to figure everything out and win nearly every game left to grab the 6th playoff spot doesn't make you a great fan. At this point, you'd have to be delusional to believe that the Lions will win 7 or 8 games." It should be clear by now that 2019 was a disappointment for the Lions. But in order to evaluate how Stafford will continue to play in 2020, and therefore understand how to bet the Detroit Lions throughout the season, it's important to recognize the strengths and the weaknesses of the offense as a whole. Now, I'm sold on the receiving core. Marvin Jones Jr. and Kenny Golladay are excellent receivers. And then adding in second-year tight end TJ Hawkinson, the Lions certainly have the best receiving core in the division and easily top 10, maybe even top 5 in the whole NFL. Galladay didn't play in the first 2 weeks of the season due to a hamstring injury, and I don't expect him to be at full strength until at least week 6. Galladay himself said, "Definitely feeling a lot better. Wouldn't say it's 100%. I really wouldn't even put a percentage on it. I just know I'm not 100%. I'm going to do everything I can, and hopefully I showed enough in practice this week that I can be out there." Having said that, it's crucial for Detroit to win a couple games right now, or else the playoffs will be out of reach before the Lions get a chance to show what they're capable of. Danny Amendola retains his role in the slot, and while his best days are well behind him, Amendola is still a decent slot receiver. The running back position is still a mess. 2018 second-round pick Kerryon Johnson has talent, but his health has been an issue, as well as what seems to me to be a habit of taking plays off. Because of all that, in 2019, the Lions drafted another running back in the second round, DeAndre Swift out of Georgia. Swift has potential, but the addition of veteran Adrian Peterson shows that the Lions aren't confident in either of their two highly drafted running backs. As the Sporting News states, Swift continued the long-standing tradition of Georgia having high-quality running backs that are targeted early in the NFL draft. He's only 5'9", but he tips the scales at 215 pounds. His athleticism and speed, 4.48 40-yard dash, along with that size, makes him a uniquely difficult man to bring down. After Adrian Peterson signed in Detroit, there are renewed worries about Swift's health and the Lions' confidence in their backfield. So like I said, the running back room is a mess. There is continuity on the offensive line, and continuity matters much more than talent on the O-line. Having guys who play together week in and week out is much better than a group of high-end guys with no chemistry, or having to change around the O-line all the time due to injury. The O-line is decent overall and ranks in the top half of the league, but the key will be whether or not highly paid right tackle Halapuli Vaitai works out. And yeah, I had to look up the pronunciation of his name. From PFF, the Lions have a strong foundation up front, but the right side of the line will determine where the Lions finish in the end of the season rankings. I haven't talked about the defense, and that's because there isn't that much to say. In 2019, Detroit had a super high first-round draft pick and had a hole to fill at the important CB1 position to replace Darius Slay, who was traded to the Eagles. The Lions drafted Ohio State stud cornerback Jeffrey Okudah, and although he's underperformed so far, I can't be mad at that pick. He's a high-end corner, and hopefully he works out. But generally, cornerback is a position that requires a season or two to adjust to the speed of the pro game. The Lions also paid a lot of money to CB2 Desmond Trufant, who just came back from a hamstring injury. According to Daniel Kelly at SI.com, right now, Darius Slay knows how to make it work for him, while Okudah is playing receivers like he is still at Ohio State. The NFL game is faster, more complex, and it requires polished technique because it is a higher level of competition. Said another way, Okudah used to be a big fish in a little pond, but not anymore. It is going to take time for Okudah to learn the pro game. But make no mistake, once he has the experience, he will prove to be the better of the two. Because of the issues on defense, particularly in the secondary, this team will be vulnerable to comebacks all season and will need to play keep away and use the clock because the defense at its best is in the bottom half of the league, even with the addition of Okudah. The defense lacks ability to make turnovers and will be hanging on for dear life against any team with even an average offense. The Detroit Free Press states, the Lions have allowed a league-worst 408 yards rushing through 2 games, and their inability to stop the run has led to a slew of issues on the defensive side of the ball. They're one of 2 teams, along with the Houston Texans, without a takeaway. They rank last in pass rush win rate. The Lions have struggled to stop the ground game for most of Patricia's 2+ seasons in Detroit. Some final thoughts on the Lions. This team will probably do just enough to keep Matt Patricia around for another year, and again, miss the playoffs by a wide margin. Matt Patricia is trash. He has weird and predictable tendencies, mostly in the second half of games, along with the second half success rate being ridiculously low. When your offensive success rate is down on plays in the second half, it's because your game plan is predictable. The Lions have a horrible tendency to take their foot off the gas and let teams right back into the game. Just ask the Saints or the Bears. Looking at the schedule, this is not a tough road for the Lions, with a lot of coin flip and winnable games ahead. But this is a team that will lose games they should win. I have a few betting recommendations for Detroit. If Stafford stays healthy, this is definitely an over team and a dangerous underdog team. There's potential for serious money to be made, particularly in the first half of the year betting Lions overs on totals. From a DFS perspective, the offensive players on this team could have huge fantasy numbers on a team that could end up with 5 wins. This is a team that you should definitely be betting on if they are double-digit dogs or anything over a touchdown, especially when going against the top teams, because the Lions have enough offense to be in games and make comebacks. This is a team that can score. And because of the talent in the passing game, Detroit can come back and score on opponents. Having said that, if you bet on the Lions this season, you will have to sweat the whole game because this defense can't stop a nosebleed. All right, now we move into the top teams in the division. Even with the Vikings' poor performance so far this year, Minnesota still gets the nod as the second best team in the division. In 2019, Minnesota went 10-6 in what was an uneven season overall. In the offseason, Minnesota lost their offensive coordinator, Kevin Stefanski, who left for Cleveland to become the head coach of the Browns. I'll put a link to the Browns season update at the top of the screen. I'm not surprised that the Vikings have had issues in 2020, just on account of the number of players they lost in the offseason. ESPN provides a list. Along with the loss of star wideout Stephon Diggs to Buffalo, the defensive production lost with the departures of Everson Griffin, Linval Joseph, Trey Waynes, Mackenzie Alexander, Xavier Rhodes, Stephen Weatherly, Andrew Sendejo, and Jaron Kearse is significant and will leave this franchise feeling the effects as it turns to this new chapter. On the flip side, Minnesota had 15 picks in the 2020 draft. That's a record since the draft went to 7 rounds. And the Vikings also have 12 picks in 2021. Minnesota used some of those picks to draft wide receiver Justin Jefferson of the national champion LSU Tigers in the first round, cornerback Jeff Gladney of TCU also in the first round, another cornerback Cameron Dantzler, and also took a decent offensive tackle out of Boise State, Ezra Cleveland. The Minnesota Star-Tribune describes the situation. This season's rookies, such as receiver Justin Jefferson and cornerbacks Cameron Dantzler and Jeff Gladney, are having to play right away. And having to learn in a hurry without preseason games is tough. Getting used to the speed of the NFL always has been the number one problem for even the best rookies. Minnesota also picked up free agent defensive tackle Michael Pierce from the Ravens, but Pierce opted out of the 2020 season because he's in the high-risk category. The big get for the Vikings was Yannick Ngakoue from the Jaguars. According to Todd Karpovich of Sports Illustrated, the Ravens invested heavily in their defensive line this offseason. Baltimore general manager Eric DeCosta acquired Calais Campbell from the Jacksonville Jaguars and signed Derek Wolfe as a free agent from the Denver Broncos. That should already be a major upgrade from last year. And now with the addition of Yannick Ngakoue in a mid-season trade with the Vikings. The defensive line could be the strength of the team, but they'll have to earn that respect from some of the analysts. The influx of rookie contracts is good for the Vikings. Minnesota is in cap hell, currently $11 million over. And remember, they're paying $90 million for a quarterback who has not proven that he is a $90 million quarterback. The team starts and ends with Kirk Cousins' ceiling as a player, and he has proven himself to be squarely between the 10th and the 15th best quarterback in the league. which is just enough to maybe win the NFC North, but probably not enough to win even one playoff game, and certainly not enough to go far past the first round. Sports Illustrated agrees with me. General Manager Rick Spielman is at the very top of the list of people who are at fault for the Vikings' current situation. He's the one who constructed this roster, and he's the one who signed off on what now seems like a major mistake, extending Kirk Cousins this offseason. Spielman's decision to extend Cousins this offseason is emblematic of a larger issue, believing that the Vikings could remake their roster on the fly and still be competitive instead of committing to a rebuild. Dalvin Cook, if he stays healthy, is still a very good running back, and maybe the best running back in terms of the screen game. Another issue for the Vikings is head coach Mike Zimmer. Zimmer is a defensive-minded coach who wants to meddle in the offensive scheme. Offensive coordinator Gary Kubiak is going to have a tough time dealing with a head coach who wants to meddle in the game plan. Defensively, in 2019, the secondary was the Achilles heel of the team, and presumably the additions to the defense will eventually be upgrades. But the youth of the secondary means probably not in 2020, especially not early in the year. From Ben Gosling at the Star Tribune, Zimmer remarked to NFL Network, "I've never had a bad defense, ever," while talking about how he was refreshed by the challenge of a real-time overhaul of a group that parted with 5 mainstays in the offseason. By kickoff Sunday, the Vikings might have started a rookie more often than in any other season under Zimmer. The Vikings have ordinarily been able to take it slow with young defensive backs under Zimmer because of how much they'd invested in more established options. Some final thoughts on the Vikings. Last year, the defense had an impressive turnover margin, including a crazy 14 fumble recoveries and 31 total takeaways. Now, it's impossible to repeat something like that, so expect regression in the turnover margin. And even with all that turnover luck, last year Minnesota was still only 2-4 in one-score games and 0-2 in field goal or less games. Meaning, even with all that extra juice from the turnovers, the Vikings have real difficulty in one-score games. Now, I know we talked about Kirk Cousins, but the overarching question is, does Cousins ever put together a blue-chip stretch? Cousins has an enormous contract for a guy who just doesn't do enough to deserve it. Now, maybe the new offensive coordinator brings something out of Cousins, but I doubt it. Looking at the schedule, there are ways to bet on this team. Minnesota has a weird front-loaded, difficult schedule. Obviously tough stuff in final quarter, but a big stretch in the middle of the season is pretty decent for them. They might be able to build momentum in the middle coming out of their bye week, assuming they can get the win against Green Bay, having already seen them once. The betting marketplace is going to forget that the Vikings are projected to be a 9-win team, especially considering the very strong possibility that Minnesota may be 2-4 through the first 6 weeks of the season. So the way to bet on this team is to let them take their lumps first before you make a bet on them. Think about it like this. We just went over the schedule. The Vikings have 15 new players who are all just getting broken into the system and getting used to their roles with the unique situation presented with no preseason. At this point, the betting public is so down on the Vikings, but their schedule all of a sudden gets a lot more favorable, and they may be able to put a nice run together and even possibly steal the NFC North right out from under the Packers. All of this creates value betting on the Vikings later in the season. Finally, I have a live betting tip for you. Adam Thielen had 2 nice seasons under Kevin Stefanski when Thielen played all 16 games and was the beneficiary of playing in the slot and of teams needing to worry about Stephon Diggs over the top beating the defense for big plays. Look at Thielen's stats. The lack of production shows that without Stephon Diggs, he's now being covered by the CB1 on every play and hasn't produced at the same level as when Diggs was taking the CB1. Justin Jefferson is coming along, but he's still a rookie, and he's not Randy Moss. In every game, take the under on Adam Thielen in every player prop category your sportsbook allows. you'll make money. All right, it's time for the current kings of the NFC North, the Green Bay Packers. There's a lot to unpack with this team, so don't be sucked in just because the Packers are playing really well right now, primarily riding on the back of Aaron Rodgers. In 2019, the Packers were not a 13-win team, but they won 13 games. The expected win total in 2019 was right under 10 wins. So how did the Packers not only get 13 wins, but make it all the way to the NFC title game? While you could point to a few different things, the big picture answer is pretty simple. In 2019, the Packers won 8 out of 9 one-score games, something that is nearly impossible to repeat. According to Riley McCaddy of The Ringer, last season the Packers overachieved. Though Green Bay went 13-3 and claimed a first-round bye, they had an incredible 8-1 record in games decided by 8 points or fewer, and a point differential, plus-minus 63, that suggested the talent of a 10-6 or even 9-7 squad. Even with the Packers' dominating performances thus far, over the last 30 years, 52 teams have improved by 6 games or more from one year to the next, like the Packers did from 2018 to 2019. A total of 0.0 of those teams won the same amount of games the next year. And on average, those teams lost 6 more games the next year. So while it may seem counterintuitive, betting against the Packers, especially as the market continues to overvalue the team, is most likely going to make you money in the long run. Having said that, Rodgers is having his best start to a season in years. He's been amazing. Bill Bender of the Sporting News says, Aaron Rodgers is back in MVP form with 887 yards passing, 9 touchdown passes, and no interceptions through a blistering 3-game stretch in which the Packers have averaged 40.7 points and 459.7 yards per game. Don't pay attention to the narrative surrounding Aaron Rodgers. Like, Rodgers is mad about Jordan Love. He's got something to prove this year. Those are ridiculous narratives that I wouldn't put a dime on. But let's be clear. Rodgers should be mad at the front office for totally screwing up this draft. The Packers, for reasons unknown to me, took a best player available approach to the 2020 draft. Now, the issue with that is that this team has needs, and Green Bay should have been drafting for those needs. This was an amazing receiver draft, and they took a running back, a quarterback, and a tight end fullback combo guy out of Cincinnati, a player who is now out for the year with a torn ACL. Now, I've seen the photos of rookie running back A.J. Dillon looking ridiculously swole, and while that's great for memes on Twitter, what the hell were the Packers thinking on these picks? This team has a glaring need for receivers, with Alan Lazard, who is now out indefinitely after core muscle surgery, and Marquez Valdez-Scantling dropping passes every week. And with receivers like that, Green Bay chooses not to draft even one wideout in the deepest wide receiver class in a decade. If I was Rodgers, I'd be mad too. Sporting News' Vinny Iyer ranked the Packers draft 32nd out of 32 teams, saying, last and least, where to begin with this draft class for GM Brian Gutekunst. After working so hard to build a 13-3 Super Bowl contender with Aaron Rodgers and Matt LaFleur last year, Green Bay drafted too much for future years. Love, Dillon, and DeGuara all won't help them win more games in 2020. Rodgers is slinging it, no question. But over the last few years, Rodgers has been unwilling to take chances to make comebacks, and we haven't seen the Packers have to do that yet. During the last few years, if the Packers got down by 2 or more scores, that was basically it, and it remains to be seen whether or not things have changed. Look at last year's NFC Championship game as just one example of what I'm talking about. Once the 49ers built a lead, it just never seemed like there was ever a threat of Rodgers coming back. Meaning if the Packers don't get off to really good starts and put up points early, I'm not sure that Rodgers is willing to take the risks needed to make a comeback. Mansour Shaheen of SB Nation points out, He has become one of the more risk-averse quarterbacks in the league, throwing more passes away than anyone else. While the interceptions have largely disappeared, so have many of the big, spectacular plays you are used to seeing from the future Hall of Famer. What Rodgers is great at is diagnosing defenses, and Green Bay has a legit running game. But all of this begs the question, what is head coach Matt LaFleur doing with the composition of this team? I feel like a broken record, but why draft A.J. Dillon? Why back up the running back position at this point when you have two studs with A.J. Dillon, a player who lacks game-breaking ability? Green Bay also lost a ton of depth on this team. They let a solid O-lineman go in Brian Bulaga. They let a ton of depth on the defensive side of the ball go as well. Literally said adios to a bunch of guys who took meaningful snaps over the last 2 years. And then they waste their top 2 picks on a quarterback and a running back, both of whom look to have zero impact on the 2020 season. Whether it's intentional or not, Matt LaFleur has decided that we are not going to be competing for a championship during the Aaron Rodgers era. Now, you can point out how good the Packers are playing, but LaFleur made no moves in the offseason to signal that they are knuckling in to make a run during Rodgers' last years. Mike Thomas of Sportscasting says, just a few months after playing in the NFC title game, Packers GM Brian Gutekunst was drafting like he was planning for 2024. Drafting a player in the first round who might not see the field for 3 or 4 years was a head-scratcher. Gutekunst then went and repeated the process in round 2. The Packers, ridiculously thin at wide receiver, especially with Davante Adams hurt once again, went the entire draft without drafting a receiver. This team is only 1 or 2 pieces away on offense from being a championship roster. And the choices made in terms of roster construction are just mind-bendingly stupid. It's mind-blowing that we sit here and as much talent as Aaron Rodgers has, he's going to retire with only 1 title. It's crazy. The way that LaFleur wants to build the team is a complete antithesis of what works in 2020. Now, it could take a couple of years for it to show just how bad this team is about to be, because right now they have enough talent to beat the bad teams. But I have no belief in the Matt LaFleur era in Green Bay, and I don't think this team is going anywhere until he's out the door. Now, I know I haven't talked about the defense, and I'm not going to. The defense is soft as hell. You can pass and run on them. Look at all the points the Packers have given up so far in 2020. It's not good. Tom Oates of the Wisconsin State Journal says, the Packers' defense at times has brought back painful memories of 2019, especially with its inability to stop the run. As Packers fans know all too well, problems that show up during the regular season tend to haunt a team in January. Some final thoughts on the Packers. This is what I think Green Bay needs to do. A championship is not going to happen this year. And Green Bay can't go into next year's draft saying, okay, let's go get a wide receiver because we screwed up last year. What the Packers need to do is trade assets to get more talented receivers and make one more run at the chip in 2021. Then, if it doesn't work, they have to trade Rodgers and get what they can for him and rebuild. The Packers have one shot at this, and that one shot is next year. They have to make good trades, have a great draft, a great offseason, and then go all in on the Aaron Rodgers last ride for a title. Looking at the schedule, this is on the tougher side because there is no stretch where the Packers can take their foot off the gas. It's going to be a fight the whole year, but also filled with winnable games. Green Bay should be a 10 or 11 win team. Some betting notes. Make sure and bet every total on the Packers game over until the market adjusts, particularly with average offenses not expected to score a lot of points, like the Jaguars or the Eagles. Also bet over whenever Green Bay goes up against any team with a running game. The market is beginning to turn in favor of Green Bay, so take advantage of that and look for spots to fade. If you've listened to the information I've given you throughout the video, you now know how to bet on the NFC North from Week 1 through the playoffs. You also know how to attack the NFL betting market in 2020, and you know how to pick the right spots to make money on each team. I definitely want to know what you think about my projections for these teams. Whether you think I'm totally crazy and you completely disagree with me, or I gave you some good information that helped you win some bets, let me know in the comments. I'll make sure and respond. Also, consider heading over to my website, aosportspicks.com, and sign up for a sports betting package where you can get my picks each week. Finally, make sure and subscribe to this channel. Hit the like button and click the notification bell so you get notified whenever I release a new video. Doing that really helps me, and it also helps the channel get placed higher in the YouTube search results so more people can see this content and the channel grows. Once again, I'm Alpha Omega. See you next time.